So welcome. This is Jean Maroney of Thinking Directions. And today in the Thinking Lab, we have the privilege of Jeff Brown joining us to teach us how to say BS in Giraffe or in RCC or using nonviolent communication. Many of you on the line actually know Jeff because you've attended one of the in-person communication intensives that I've been running over the last couple of years. Jeff is the NVC trainer, certified trainer, who has been running those with me, and everyone who meets Jeff loves Jeff. So for those of you who don't know Jeff, you're going to make a new wonderful person in your life now that you're going to get to meet him. Jeff is an expert at this skill, and he is going to tell us how to do this. This is something I don't know how to do. I've never heard this segment of his, and I'm really eager to hear it. So is there anything else I need to say before you're ready to get started, Jeff?
Only a question. Are you mandating that everybody here likes me today, or are they allowed to dislike me?
They're allowed to dislike you, and I'll be shocked if that's the case.
Okay, I'm relieved.
Yes, okay.
I've definitely met some people who don't care for me too much, so I'm relieved I don't need to be perfect here.
You don't have to be perfect. You, just the way you are is going to be just great for all of us. I predict. I don't demand.
I understand. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm ready to take it away. I may prompt you at various times, Jean, but
Sure.
yeah, so I just want to acknowledge Harry. It was the genesis of a large reason for this topic. Harry expressed his curiosity at one point about how to say BS. So I may prompt you at some point, Harry. But I want to frame up the topic. I have about a 5-minute slideshow to show you. And since we have an hour, I'd like to engage you all. So before too long, I want to ask questions and get some examples and talk with you as opposed to just at you. So I'll probably talk at you for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then I'd like to talk with you the rest of the time. So I'd like to start by sharing the slideshow. So let me see if we can make that work technologically. Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen. And Jean, tell me if this is visible to people.
I'm seeing it.
Okay. Can you nod your head if you can also see it? Okay, good. Okay, so topic here today is how to say BS using rational communication, which is a term that Jean uses. The work that I do is formally based out of nonviolent communication, which I like to call collaborative communication. But let's see here. Next one. There we go. So the purpose that I have here today is to show you how you can confront people who you believe are not being truthful with you. Now, probably you already know how to do that. Everybody knows how to do that. But without facing the collateral damage that we often face when we, quote unquote, confront people and call them out, call them to the table. So the goal here is to show you how you can confront people, say BS, but also reduce the negative outcomes and maximize your likelihood for lasting success. Okay? So what is lasting success? What would be positive outcomes of successfully saying BS? Well, the first one is you could actually get the information you're looking for. You could get the accurate information that you feel is missing, that you believe you're not getting, that whatever reason the person is being evasive or is telling you something you know not to be true or you suspect is not true. Well, part of what you'd like is to actually get the truth. So you're more likely to get the truth, to get the accurate information, if you say BS in a certain way. The second positive outcome that we're aiming for here is to maintain the quality of the relationship. Assuming you want to maintain the relationship. I'm not suggesting you should or you have to. Certainly there are times where we may elect to sever a relationship or reduce it or change it. But assuming in the moment that this is a relationship that you have, it helps you maintain dignity and helps the other person save face without sacrificing the truth that you're looking for. And the third positive outcome is the basis of the work that I do with Jean. and that is to increase the rationality in the conversation. All the rational values that are at the basis of objectivism, well, we're aiming to get closer to that and to bring out a higher expression within the communication so that it is more rational. Okay? So, here's some suggestions of what not to say. I suggest not saying bullshit. I suggest not saying you're lying. I suggest not saying you're a liar, bullcrap, rubbish, you're a con artist, you're a phony, and so on and so forth. Now, of course you can say those things, and there might be a time and a place where it makes sense to say those things. I would propose, however, that in most cases, when you say that, you're starting a slippery downhill slide. You're losing traction with the conversation. You're sowing the seeds of discontent and disconnection with the other person that are not likely to bring you these positive outcomes I mentioned a moment ago. Now, again, there's no rules. I'm not here to impose any rules or shoulds on anybody. I have certainly used these words at times. But let's move forward with the premise that in many cases, it's not to your advantage to express yourself this way. So, as an alternative, what might you say instead? So, from a nonviolent communication perspective, everything centers upon what we call universal human needs, or what Jean has called universal rational values. It's very close, essentially synonymous. So what are the core motivators, the core drivers that we all have as human beings that we aspire to? Well, this is rule number one, front and center, is that when we say BS, we share what our needs are underneath what's happening. So just as an example, and I'm going to give you a specific example in a few moments. But as an example, you might say, you know, when you describe the work that you say you've been doing, it's not matching what I'm seeing. It's important for me to have trust in my relationships. And I also have a need for shared reality so I can be successful. Okay, so I've just said bullshit, and I can say it in starker terms than that. But notice how I've taken responsibility for my interpretations. And before I go on, I have a couple more slides. I suggest you always hold open the possibility, no matter how slight you think it might be, that your initial interpretation of the person lying or being dishonest or evasive might not be fully accurate. Now, it might be. It absolutely might be, and we know that does happen. But I suggest initially to inquire by taking responsibility for your interpretations until you can clarify what the other person's intentions are. Okay. So, 3 more slides and then I'm going to ask some questions. So what are human needs, or what are rational values? Well, they're the resources we need to sustain life and to enrich life. They are universal across this planet. Everyone who has studied objectivism, I believe, has the same basic human needs. And everybody who's never studied objectivism, never even heard of Ayn Rand, has those same needs. It's just that some of you have come to Ayn Rand's work, or objectivism, or Jean, or whatever, because you find it to be an effective tool, an effective strategy for attending to your needs. Okay. Now, unfortunately, in many cases, people do not express their needs directly. Instead, they express them indirectly. So these are some examples. So I'm going to use Jean as an example here because I know she'll know what I'm talking about, just playing around. So let's say, for instance, I'm struggling with this webinar. And I'm feeling a little confusion, and I'm not clear whether I'm meeting Jean's hopes for it. And I'm struggling with the technology. And I discover that I have a need for support. I would really benefit from some support, particularly from Jean, because she's the host, the organizer. So I could just say that, hey, Jean, I'm struggling here. Do you mind giving me some support with something? so that I can be less distracted and really serve people. Okay, so I've said my need for support directly. Now, however, I've been educated to express my needs indirectly. So if I were mindless about it, or if I wasn't practicing what I preach, I might say, Gene, why are you using Zoom? This system is terrible. It's confusing. What kind of thought did you give to choosing this system? Or I might say, Gene, you didn't prepare me enough. I mean, you didn't give me enough information about all these people. I mean, I see them looking at me. You didn't tell me they were this strange and weird. I thought they were going to be normal people. This was an inadequate preparation. You know, you really should have thought more about this before throwing me to the wolves. I mean, these people are horrible. Okay. I'm using a little humor at all of your expense here. But do you notice how I'm expressing my needs? So Jean, just love to hear your voice here. Just, of course, I'm being humorous.
Right.
But what do you make of that? These two ways of expressing?
Well, the first one is so much clearer, and it's clear what it is you're wishing that I would do. And if given that there is a situation, yes, I'd be willing to support you, and then I'm actually curious to find out how to help. Whereas in the other cases, it's not exactly clear what the problem is, because of course I'm not seeing any problem with Zoom. I'm not seeing the problems that you're seeing, and it sounds like, and it's not even clear that you want me to do something to help out with the situation.
Thank you. Yes, I would say that's one of the main advantages of expressing our needs directly, or our values directly, is we stand a much better chance that the person will understand what we want and subsequently be able to do something to support our needs. Whereas we introduce static and interference in the connection between ourselves and others, when we take our needs and we distort them into judgments of wrongness. Now, I know there's a positive version of judgments. Of course, we need to have value-centered judgments. That's essential to life. But I'm talking about here judgments that make another person wrong, that imply their inadequacy and badness. And that introduces interference that we want to avoid. Okay. So last slide. These are some examples of what we mean by universal rational values, or in my lexicon, universal human needs. So we're just talking about the basic building blocks that all human beings can relate to, aspire to have some of in their lives. Now, of course, the way it looks in different people's lives is as unique as there are people. There are 7 billion versions and varieties of exactly what this looks like. But I would propose that all human beings have a deep need for meaning and purpose. We want our lives to be purposeful. We obviously have physical needs, that's pretty obvious. We have a need for trust, I would propose, which is something that comes up a lot with saying BS. So I'm going to pull down the PowerPoint for now and just come back to you with the video. So I'd like to engage some of you right now. I'd like to give you an example of how I said BS. But Harry, I'm curious, since this was originally inspired by your request, would you be willing to say any words right now about how this is landing for you, and if this is pointing towards what you were hoping to learn when you requested it?
Yeah, sure. What the biggest thing that it's pointing to is that connection to have with the person that I'm talking to after I, call them out. I mean, however I say it, even if I said it just the way you were suggesting, my habitual fear would be that I'm going to be attacked and I pull myself back. And, that reminder to find out how does this, I guess you haven't quite gotten there yet, but in the handout you were suggesting, that was real helpful.
Great. So I hear you talking about focusing on the quality of connection after you, quote, call someone out, however you do that. But focus on what happens after that to tend to the relationship.
Yeah, I think even more fundamentally to focus on the fact, is there even a connection? I I mean, I've called them out, but emotionally, let's say if it's really a charged situation, emotionally, I'm out the door. I might physically still be there, but it sounds a little weird, but if they say something and you ask me afterwards, what did they say? I probably didn't hear it.
Okay.
I mean, it's that important to me, this realization.
Mm-hmm.
Is that helpful? Is that
Oh, I'm finding that very helpful. Thank you. Jean, were you about to add something?
Yeah, I think that's such a great observation, Harry, to be able to just project back and see that maintaining connection was just something you didn't actually have room for right at that moment is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, room for. Yeah, that's exactly it. My fear was like so big to take this analogy. There could be other things too, but whatever it is just displaces my ability to be present and really to think.
Yes, especially if there's a lot at stake, like if it's an important work situation or a family relationship. The more important something is, the more off-center we might get, the more triggered we are, the more agitated or anxious we are, which makes it all the much harder to go after what you're pointing to, Harry, about the quality of connection.
It also occurs to me too, and you talk about an important relationship. If I'm convinced, and it turns out afterwards I was quite right, that this person is in the wrong and they're doing something I really would rather they didn't do. And let's say we've gone over this before and I have, they said, oh, I'm not going to do that or something like that. That concern with they're wrong and I'm right adds to that pushing away that I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So me leaving and emotionally outside the room, maybe I can be righteous about it and see I was right and that person is whatever and have my laundry list, but I haven't gotten what I wanted. And, in deep, important personal relationships, when I have these kinds of discussions, that has a real cost. So I'm motivated to learn more.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to know if anybody else has a reaction or response to anything I've said. So can anyone else relate to this desire to say BS and anything else I've said, kind of an open sharing? And if you're on the telephone, Jean, tell me if this is right. You would press *9 as a way to raise your hand.
That's correct. If you're on the phone, it's *9. And if you're on the video, you need to get the participants button up. And then over on the side under more, there's a raise hand feature.
Or you can just wave, I guess we could see.
That too, yes. Yeah. We've got several hands up. Shall I just call on them, Jeff?
Just choose somebody, yeah.
So we have Catherine.
Jeff, the helpful example was really clear because you described the issue in terms that really nobody could disagree with. But when somebody has been, when I want to say bullshit, it's BS, pardon me, is when somebody has been egregiously wrong. And I'm so shocked, it's hard to think clearly enough to just describe the facts.
Because
I'm
you're so
shocked and offended.
Yeah, because you're so upset by what they've said and you're so aghast, kind of.
Yes, exactly. There's been such a violation of trust and respect, and it's because been a long time since I've used that phrase, BS.
Yeah, right. So you're mostly you think of that phrase when something's been really egregious, like an extreme example of a lie or withholding information, something like that.
Yes, and consequently a serious injustice to me, and of course to the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to think fast enough to.
Oh yeah, well you're pointing to the core of the work that I teach, because that's frequently the case. The higher the stakes are, and the more shocking something is, the more something matters to us, the more difficult it is to communicate rationally ourselves, because we are likely to be stimulated into a state of imbalance or disturbance. And we start thinking less clearly, we start communicating less clearly. So one of the main principles to help with that is to practice, to do the self-work, kind of the self-management work, which is hard in the moment, I grant you. But it's to carve out a little space and time within our own world to get clear on what am I reacting to, why am I reacting this way, and why is it important to me? In other words, what are the key values that have been triggered or touched upon in this circumstance? And that usually has the function of grounding us and clarifying our inner thoughts and our inner world. Now, of course, easier said than done, especially in a case like you say where it really affects you. It has a big impact. But to the best of our ability, we can pause, get clear about what our values are that have been animated by the situation, and get clear about that. And that usually sufficiently can ground us so that we can speak more rationally. Is this helpful for you, Catherine? Does that relate to
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
Right. Okay.
Can I add on something to that?
Sure.
And I think it's so helpful to even just have that intention. Because if you have that intention and you find you actually can't ground yourself emotionally in the moment, that's a big red flag. Okay, I'm so emotionally overloaded. I actually can't handle this situation right now. I need to excuse myself, not make the situation worse. And it's always easier if you can give yourself some physical privacy and then come back. But to have the presence of mind to realize that you're emotionally overloaded is extremely helpful.
Yeah, it's great information. If we know what to look for and how to look, it's extremely valuable information, right? Okay. My reflexive or my habitual tendency is to always give the benefit of the doubt, have compassion for other people, listen to them, offer them my compassionate empathy. And only secondarily, if I ever get to it, if there's ever time, then eventually maybe I'll get around to actually putting myself on the table, my values front and center. But gosh darn it, sometimes there's not enough time. The right time never emerges. And Wallace, I'm enjoying your visual response. I can't hear you, but I see you're clapping, and I gather you really resonate with that. So,
can I add one little bit on this?
Certainly.
I so agree with what both were saying. And I think that this is related. We had a number of people on the call were on a decisions call I was doing earlier in the day, the freebie I did. And it's related to confronting a decision that you need to make. That in fact, it takes a special effort to say, okay, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to make a conscious decision about how to handle this. And often when it's a person, that raises the stakes and makes it that much harder. But even on a small decision, it takes a special act to decide, okay, I'm going to, I don't know if confront is the right word, but I'm going to face this challenge and try to address this challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. I mean, I'm not sure to what extent this tendency is true in the objectivist community, but I'll speak first about the nonviolent communication community. And that is, there's a very common virus that runs in our community because it's about compassion. It's about compassionate communication. So we get this idea that compassion means showing it to other people, but diminishing the importance of our own values and needs. And I consider that very problematic. I suffer from the same malady, which I've partially overcome, thankfully. But still, there's this tendency, this just in the back of my head, I think, oh, you know, I should listen to them first. And what I want to emphasize in this webinar is the importance of speaking our truth plainly, unapologetically, unreservedly, nakedly. This is what matters to me. And what I'm hearing from you right now is not quite jiving. It just doesn't, I'm not seeing how it relates to the evidence that I'm seeing. And I'm really wanting to understand, is there anything in the way? Okay, so let me put my screen back up here for a moment. Show you a couple more slides, and I'm going to share with you an example. Okay, so this is the first one that you saw earlier. And Jean, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Great, okay. So this is a repeat. And I realize some of you are on the phone, so I'll try to audibly illustrate this. So once again, basic suggestion when saying BS is to express the needs that are alive for you. Okay. Now, once you do that, there's a couple of directions you can go. Because when you say BS, if you say BS by saying, hey, here's what I'm seeing, I'm not trusting what I'm seeing, and I really want to know we have shared reality. Okay. Now that's only half the message. I strongly predict that if you say that and only that, the person will get defensive, they'll make excuses up, they'll try to do an end around and just take you right back into the same swirl, same circle. So there's a second component to saying BS that I'm illustrating with the slide that I'll also verbalize. And that is, you need to engage the other person and ask them a question that they can respond to. That is hopefully a generative question, a productive question. So there's a couple of ways you could go. How do you feel about me saying what I just said? Okay, so I'm asking for a response, or I might say it more plainly, like, what do you make of what I've just said? Okay, so I'm engaging them. Or I might say, does this make sense to you? As I describe my experience, can you see where I'm coming from? Okay, so we refer to these in nonviolent communication as connection requests. So a request is an actionable question that's essential to engage in the other person in a productive, forward-moving conversation. It's a particular variety of a request. It's aiming kind of at what Harry spoke of initially when I asked him to talk, of, okay, I've said bullshit, now what do I want? I mean, maybe I just want to say BS and walk away and never see the person again. And if that's what you want, you can do that. But I think in many cases, we're going to have an ongoing relationship with the person. So the way to attend to the connection after we say BS is to use either of these requests. Could you tell me how you feel about what I've said? Or does what I've said make sense to you? What sense are you making of my experience? Okay. Now the last slide is we could go another direction instead of or in addition to that direction I just described. And this would be the technology of an action request, okay, which is pointing a little bit less towards just how are you, how are we right now about what I've brought up, but more what can we do right now? Okay, so it's more pointing towards solution. Okay, so a couple of my favorite action requests. I've had good luck with these at times. One would be, what would you need to have from me in order for you to be fully honest with me, or to be fully authentic with me? And that's produced some interesting responses. But you see how it's a generative question. It's like, what would need to happen now for you to tell me the full truth and everything that's happening? Okay. Another example. Again, this is an action request. Is there any truth to my suspicion that you are withholding something from me here? And if there is, could you tell me what it is right now so that I could have the full picture? So these are just examples, and you might get the same runaround that you were getting before. You could get anything. In fact, you will get all sorts of crazy responses. You'll get counterattacks. You'll get defensiveness. The person might run away in a huff. Or, surprisingly often, the person might pause and say, it's kind of like throwing them a curve. It's like that. It's not what they're expecting. They're not expecting you to communicate this way. They're expecting, the other way. You're full of shit. What's wrong with you? And they have all the defensives prepared for that. But this is a way to, what's the word? Jean, help me with the word, to invalidate the defensiveness, to inoculate. There's some word I'm looking for.
Right, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I can't get it either.
Yeah, this.
But it's it's on the tip of my tongue.
If
You're
anybody
like
listening,
offering support. You're
yeah,
offering
chat it in.
support when they were expecting criticism, and they're kind of
disarm. That's it, Jay.
That's
Jay
it.
is guessing
Thank you,
disarm. That's right. It's disarming. Thank you, Jay. Their defensiveness, which they're prepared. You see, most people are prepared at a moment's notice to give you a defensive response. And I think there's many reasons for that, which I won't go into much on this call, but that's what they're very familiar with that. They defend themselves. What our aim with using the BS approach is to disarm that defensiveness such that their defensiveness is not valid or relevant.
Not necessary.
And not necessary. They need not defend themselves. They need to go to a different place in their mind, in their consciousness. And this is what produces the seeds of a breakthrough conversation, of an emergent possibility. Okay, so let me give you an example of a BS conversation I had, and then I'm going to engage you again, and we'll have Jean call on some people. So the example I thought of is in April, the fall. It was October. So in October, I was the lead organizing trainer for a 9-day program in part of the United States. It's an international program. 50 people ended up attending, 4 trainers. I assembled a team, and we worked with a local organizer to make this happen. And as I was working with the local organizer, I started noticing these discrepancies. It just, really, you did that? And then, so I started by just kind of very neutrally engaging him. I'm like, are you sure you did that? Or could you show me? Oh, yeah, Jeff, I did it. I did that. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. But I kept getting feedback, both things that I saw and feedback from participants who were trying to register. They said, I can't get a hold of anybody. And I'm like, that's weird. So again, I engaged the person. And I said, person, I've been getting this feedback. And, we said we had to establish a spreadsheet. I don't see these people's names in the spreadsheet. And we had agreed that everyone who inquired about the program would go on the sheet. And that way we could interface with them. Are you still putting everybody on the sheet? Yes, everybody's on there. I'm like, oh, okay. Are you double checking both email accounts because maybe one of them is forwarding somewhere else? No, I've got it, Jeff, really. Everyone who's contacted us has been communicated with. I'm like, oh, okay, all right, well, let's just keep tracking it. Lo and behold, about 3 or 4 weeks later, same feedback. I'm like, what is going on here? And I came to the point where I really believed that he was lying to me. I didn't think it was an honest oversight. I honestly believed that he was being evasive. He was lying. Now, I didn't know why. I was speculating. Maybe he felt guilt or shame. But whatever the case, it doesn't really matter, because this wasn't happening and the program was suffering, and it was really to the point where it might not even happen because these people who want to come can't even register. So I geared myself up to have a BS conversation with this person. And as close as I can remember, I said, hey person, I want you to know about this feedback I'm getting. I've heard from at least 10 people who have said they followed the links, they've reached out, they've written emails, they've called, and they tell me they haven't heard back. I've heard you say to me that everybody has gotten contacted and communicated with. And these two things are not matching up. I'm really worried about the program. And I really want to be able to trust that what we say is going to happen, happens. And even more important, if it can't happen or doesn't happen for any reason, that there is clear, open communication about everything. Because I want this program to work, and I want our relationship to stay in I want us to have shared reality. So what I'm most curious about, person, this is what I said to him, is there anything that I've done or said along the way that has made it hard for you to be honest with me? I'd really like to know. And that was the $64 million question. He said, yeah, you know, I always feel judged by you, Jeff. You know, you're such an expert at this. You've been doing it all these years. This is my first one. You know, I make the tiniest little mistake and you jump all over my back. So this was the information I needed. And this basically confirmed that he was lying to me, right? So I got confirmation right away. He didn't say it in so many words, but he said, basically, I've been withholding information from you because I'm afraid you're going to be mad at me. So this is valuable information. And I won't go into all the details of the conversation. It went on, it proceeded. But I came around to know what needs to happen here. Because I was really considering trying to replace the person, which I have the power to influence heavily. I probably could have made it happen with the master organization because I have a lot of pull. Do you still want to do this? Do you still want to work with me? Because I'm doing it. So we had a really honest conversation, and the energy went up immediately. So it's just a success story. So I think I'd like to engage the rest of you now. I've got about 15 minutes. I'd like to hear if anybody here has an example in their life where either they've attempted to say BS and it didn't go so well, or they really want to say BS, but they haven't worked themselves up to doing it. And I can kind of coach you through. We can kind of pull it apart for everyone's benefit. So is there anybody here who fits that category? If so, press *9 or wave your hand if you're one of the video participants. Gina, I'll let you choose somebody.
And I'll just notice there were a couple people who had their hands up earlier. And why don't I check and see if they have an example? But if you have a question, we should probably save it to the end. Am I right with that? That if they have a question rather than an example, we should save it, or?
Yeah, go ahead and ask it, and I'll weave it into whatever happens. So.
All right. Okay. So Stephanie, you had your hand up.
Okay. Thanks. Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
When you were first reading out the what not to say, it was on the placard on the, and I read rubbish and you're a liar. And okay, for me, the example is lately I've been responding to people's stupid comments online, right, to articles, right? I'm in Canada, so there's a whole big thing going on with Tim Hortons and the minimum wage and so on. So I've been responding and saying, so-and-so, you're wrong, blah, 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 and saying something. And a few people put like, right? But I'm thinking, rather than saying, you know, rubbish or you're wrong, to use this system to figure out ways to say it. It's not just because X guy, I don't know who he is, I'm not going to have a relationship with him, but because I'm trying to spread objectivism. And you know, there's a peanut galleries, all these people who never comment, but they read it all. They're going to see something. So find a way to engage with these people and to make the point without being rude or saying you're wrong, you're full of it, right? Because that doesn't move the conversation forward.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's where I'm doing a lot of that now, a lot more now. I'm retired. I can go online and spend a couple hours answering these things and getting the points out there, getting good feedback. But this is going to help me to do a better job. So anything you can say further about doing it in writing, because there's a time limit. It's not forever. They close. The CBC will close the comment section after a day or so. So you have time in the sense that it doesn't happen this 5 minutes, but you don't have a week. If you leave it for a couple of days, they close the comment section on an article.
Yeah, you need to get your point across. You need to get your point across succinctly.
And relatively quickly, but it's not the same as engaging with someone face to face.
Sure.
But, I mean, this is something I'm really keen on doing more of, and spreading objectivism and doing it by dealing with topics and getting a point out there that's important and addressing someone who's completely wrong but doing it in a civil manner.
Yeah, and I hear that you're searching for a way to be as effective as possible at getting this point across, and you have this sense that maybe there's a more effective, impactful way to do it.
Yes.
So this is giving you some ideas about how you might do that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And first of all, I'm chuckling when you said, hey, I said you're wrong, and everybody's saying like. Well, yeah. And any discussion board on politics or culture or anything else for that matter, people are going to respond to right and wrong. But I really resonate with you. It doesn't necessarily move the conversation forward in such a way that a person opens their mind to what you're trying to offer.
Which is what I want to do.
That's what you want to do. You want to offer something you think will be more helpful and more effective for everyone concerned. So the question becomes, how can we communicate our values in a way that maximizes the likelihood that people will be receptive and actually take in and consider what I'm trying to offer?
Mm-hmm.
That's really the essence of my work with nonviolent communication. So that's a broad, the broad purpose of nonviolent communication, but it really goes back to the core part of the work, which is rather than expressing our needs indirectly through ideas of who's right and who's wrong, instead we talk about our values and how the values are showing up in the Tim Hortons minimum wage or any situation. So I would just ask you, what values of yours are showing up in the discussion that you'd like to broadcast to people? What's important to you? And I'm really asking you, what matters to you about this discussion?
Well, it matters to me because the minimum wage is going to end up impacting me because they've mandated it to be, they've left it up so quick that a lot of businesses are, letting people go. They're not hiring. I mean, it even impacts, if I were going to start a business, I would have to have an employee and have to pay them a certain amount. So it's the fact that costs are going to go up. I'm now on a fixed income. I can't afford for anything to go up, right?
Okay.
So it's because changing the culture takes a long time, but to get people to realize that the minimum wage, they're saying, well, it should have been introduced more slowly. It's like, no, the whole thing should be scrapped, right? How can I get people to realize that we've got to get rid of all this intervention, that you can't solve the problem with more poison? So the values to me are getting the point out there. And it was just something where I was reading it because I use Tim Hortons. I'm on their side.
So let me try to put some words to it to see if they speak to you. So I'm hearing there's a personal effect on you, on your own financial viability and sustainability and security. And also you see for the culture at large, there's some real detriments to implementing this minimum wage. And you would like people to have a more choice and freedom as they run businesses, start businesses. You really want to have a trust in, I'm extrapolating here, but you want to have a trust in the market forces and the generative ability of people in their businesses. And you're concerned about government solutions. You have more trust in kind of the freedom of creativity. Does any of that speak to you?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
Okay,
Definitely.
so right here, these words are much different than you're wrong, okay? Because they think they're right. People who support the minimum wage know that they're right. They know that they're right, just as much as you know that you're wrong. So I would propose that to the extent that you would like to influence people's thinking and invite them to see something you think would really benefit everybody, we abstain from bullshit in the same way that we abstain from "you're wrong," because that's a subjective interpretation.
Well, even though objectively they are wrong, but still, there's a better way to say it than just saying you're wrong. I think that's what I want to look for, is to find ways to make the point, because you've only got a short time. I can't teach them all about the purpose of government and the role of ethics, and I mean, it's just like courses, right?
You certainly can't do that. You can't do that, but I believe it's possible in 1 or 2 sentences for you to convey the values of yours that are important, and that would open their eyes and open their minds. And that's really the first step in true engagement and influence. Yes. Yeah.
Well, thanks, though, for your help. This is helpful already today.
Thank you. Awesome. All right. Appreciate it, Stephanie. Thanks.
Great. Great. And so Pooja, you had, I think, an example you wanted to bring up. Is that right?
Or a question.
Or a question? I think I've unmuted you. Maybe you're muted at your end somewhere.
Yes, I did have an example and a question. Which one should I go with?
Why don't you give the example first?
Okay, so very quickly, this is regarding my manager, and he recently sent out an email on work from home policies. And we know that our senior management, they're okay with people working from home. They're more relaxed, and so far they have allowed us to, work from home, 2 or 3 times in a week, and basically just on ad hoc basis, totally depending on our, discretion, right? But I know that in my team, 1 and 2 new people who have joined have actually abused that policy, right? They say they're working from home, but they're not available, and they're taking care of their sick kid or whatever. So my immediate manager sends out this email saying, our policy is that you have to be in the office 9 to 3, that you have to, only work from home when there is a snow emergency and stuff like that. So basically, I'm waiting to talk to him about the email that he sent out. And it's a really high concern for me because I enjoy working from home because I feel like I have control over my time and over my day to optimize my work. And
so is this, I'm hearing this is important to you.
Right.
Is this a case where you are wanting to give your manager feedback, or is it a case where you feel the manager is lying or being evasive?
I think, his email, he's treating everybody as one, like, okay, I need to tell this to the team. I understand that he needed to deal with these 2 people, and tell them, but the change in policy, or, not change in policy, because I know that the senior management allows us to do this, but what he's saying is affecting me when I don't abuse the system.
I see. Right. Because you mentioned you perceive that a couple of other people are actually abusing the privilege of working from home, or you try to have integrity with it and work hard.
And it has worked for me, right? In the past 2 years, it has worked for me, and I'm productive and I meet my commitments.
Yes.
So I understand this need. Yeah.
There's a need for equality, to be treated fairly. That sounds like is one part of it, and also the flexibility for you to work in a way that really works in your life.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say this is a great opportunity for using the skill of giving feedback and expressing what your values are. It may or may not be directly related to saying bullshit, because that would be more like if you felt, it may be these other people who are quote unquote abusing the system are claiming that they're not abusing the system. So maybe if you were to discuss it with them, that might be a BS conversation. Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Yeah, I would rather just directly talk to my manager, right? Yeah. And in terms of my manager, the BS thing is that this is not the company-wide policy, that he's trying to implement a policy because he doesn't want to talk to these 2 people alone, right? And straighten them out. So instead of that, he's laying out, he's coming back and saying, oh, this is our policy. Well, it's not our policy. They allow us to work from home. It's on him he's a resource manager to deal with the people who are abusing the system. So that's the BS part.
That certainly makes sense. Yes. So, I mean, I would say, broadly speaking, this is another opportunity for using nonviolent communication in a way that increases your chances for success. And what I mean by that is if and when you speak to your manager, I highly recommend getting clear before you speak to him what your underlying needs and values are that lie underneath the surface of your preferences and strategies.
Right.
So one of the most important distinctions that we make in my work is the difference between values and strategies, or needs and strategies.
Right.
It's something that most people, they get them mixed up. They conflate needs and strategies. They'll say things like, I need to be able to work from home.
Right.
And I would say that's not an underlying human need. I would say that's my preference. I prefer to work from home. Right. Because it gives me the freedom to relax and have flexibility with my life. And I can really think clearly in a quiet space, and I can be productive. This is what lies underneath the surface. So you see, there's an invisible, rich field of communication that lies right underneath the surface, that is mostly invisible to us.
Right.
And it's a damned shame, because that's the information we need to create generative conversations and to solve problems. But sadly, as a culture, as a people, as a species, I don't know, we have become distracted from the core message of what really matters. And instead we focus on the superficial manifestations of our needs. So the basic principle, and I can see we're coming up on the end of our time here, Jean. The main principle I'd like to leave you all with, whether expressing honestly like Pooja might wish to do, or saying BS when you think someone is lying, the main thing that I urge you to do is to excavate, to identify your core values and your core needs, and to lead with those things, to say those things directly and unabashedly, and to lead with that message, because that makes it easier for people to understand where you're coming from. It makes them less likely to be defensive, and it invites them into a more rational exploration of solving the problem. And it increases your likelihood of success, frankly. So, Jean, is there anything that you would care to add?
Yes, I mean, here, I agree entirely. And I just, to put the spin that I have on this is that when you go to those universal needs or the deep rational values, one of the things that happens is you get to something that's so deep that the other person respects it and cares about it, and it brings up a positive aspect, and it gets to a foundation where you really are in some deep agreement with this person, even if they've been behaving badly. And when you can find that, it changes the relationship with the person, because you're not looking at them as a bad person. You're looking at them as a person who also has this grounding, and that really shifts the whole focus.
Yeah, here. So I will be glad to share the PowerPoint. Jean, can I email that to you and you could share it with people who might like to see it later?
Yes, that would be great. I'll put it into the folder with your handout, and the recording will also be in that same folder.
And thank you for mentioning that. I encourage all of you to check out the handout. It wasn't really relevant for a webinar, but you might find some useful materials in the PDF that I sent to Jean.
Yes, for reference. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Great.
So I think that's our time for today, right, Jean?
That's our time. Do you have a minute for a chorus of thank yous? Would that be all right?
Sure, yeah, I have a minute.
I'm just going to unmute everyone, and if you would like to share an appreciation of Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yep, thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Great job.
Very interesting.
I guess I should have actually asked for gratitude also. Should. But I'll just say I'll end just a second.
The average.
Just a second. Whoops, Jeff, I lost you. Hold on one second. I just want to say I'm going to give you a little bit of gratitude. So I heard a lot of specific strategies, particularly the ideas of asking, is there anything I'm doing that's making this difficult? Or what could we do in order to change this? Which put a different ending. I knew about the self-empathy part, but I didn't know about the ending part. And I'm just very grateful for the specificity of some of those suggestions, and also for the integration with the whole method. I thought it brought a lot of clarity to this problem, and so I'm really appreciate your making the time to do this webinar. It's above and beyond, and I really appreciate it.
Wonderful. I'm delighted to hear that feedback. That was one of my hopes, Jean, and I'm kind of encouraged from doing this. This is actually the first time that I ever have led this specific topic in any setting.
Aha, really?
So this is very exciting. I feel very encouraged by it.
I think it generates a lot of interest. This is the most people we've ever had on one of these RCC practice sessions.
Awesome.
So I think generate a lot of interest.
Yeah, and I hope if we do any more trainings together, Jean, maybe people would like to join us. It'd be great to meet you in person if I haven't yet. So
that would be great. And I'm going to be emailing you. I'm trying to set up a date in Naples in April. So we'll see if not in April, then some other time. But I actually need to email you about that. We've got a couple of live ones. So if anyone on the call is interested in a 4-day communication intensive in Naples, Florida, not Naples, Italy, in April, give me a caller and we'll see if we can work out some dates.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, Jean. It was nice to meet all of you today.
Thanks. All right. Bye-bye.